Managing Director of Endeavor Miami, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Alexandra Wilkis Wilson. Alexandra is a visionary entrepreneur investor who has distinguished herself with a string of digital enterprises that have delighted consumers and disrupted industries. She's co-founder of successful companies like Gilt, GlamSquad, and Fitz, and most recently, she's co-founder of a growth equity fund, the Clerisy Growth Fund of $100 million. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you.
Thank you for having me, Claudia.
So let's get started because I'm sure the audience can't wait to learn about your trajectory and some of the insights you're going to share with all of them today. So you've previously described yourself as a corporate gal. So tell us, what drove you to becoming an entrepreneur? When did you know that you wanted to create and build companies?
So I would say that I have always had an entrepreneurial spirit ever since I was a little girl. I grew up in New York City, and I was one of those girls who was always doing lemonade stands with her friends after school and on the weekends. So I think my personality definitely had some entrepreneurial traits. And now, given where I am at age 44, it all seems very obvious. But to be honest, at the beginning of my career, I thought a lot more about climbing a more traditional ladder. When I graduated from college in 1999, I started in investment banking in New York, focused on the Latin America group, then London. And then after my MBA, actually went into luxury and didn't actually have the title of entrepreneur until 2007. So that's when that whole journey and addiction and obsession started.
Yeah, I'm sure it was an exciting ride. And Gilt was your first company. So what would you say was the most important learning that you had or that experience brought you? And what would you attribute the hyper growth that Gilt had in terms of revenues and employees?
So Gilt really was the transformative entrepreneurial experience of my career, I would say. We started in 2007, and there are so many things that we learned, definitely too many to fit into a short panel today. One of my Gilt co-founders and still one of my best friends, Alexis Maybank, and we actually wrote a book, which if any of you are entrepreneurs and starting consumer digital tech companies, you might find it helpful. It's called By Invitation Only, How We Built Gilt and Changed the Way Millions Shop. And the reason we wrote the book was really to inspire entrepreneurship in general, especially among women, but in general for sure. And I think for us, there's so many learnings. But really, for me, as my first venture, one of the best lessons was to think really big. I think sometimes first-time entrepreneurs, just don't have the full visionary unicorn dream or vision. I remember we brought in a pretty seasoned CFO about a year into Gilt, and she gave me the book Blueprint to $1 Billion, and I burst out laughing. And she said, "What's so funny?" And I said, "Well, $1 billion. I mean, you must have high expectations for us." And she's like, "No, you guys can do this." And I remember being like, "Oh my gosh, she's serious!" Like, wow, that wasn't even remotely in my thinking when we started the company in 2007. And we grew, for those of you that know the story, we grew like a rocket ship. We, within about 5 years, got to $650 million in revenue. And at one point we had just a crazy 2-year growth period. We found our employee base doubling every quarter. So one quarter we had 25 employees, next quarter 50, next quarter 100, next quarter 200, 400, 800. So, that's an amazing hyper growth experience and time, and so exciting. But it's also incredibly stressful, as you can imagine, because just about everything you set up when you're an itty bitty company of 5 co-founders sitting in a little shared cubicle of could barely call it an office, is very different when you have to put in infrastructure for 1,300 employees, which is, I think, the peak that we got to in terms of employee count. And when we were doing 600 million plus in revenue, and we had millions of members who were checking our site every single day. So, I guess my biggest lesson learned to those of you, and I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs listening today, probably at very different stages, is just think as big as you possibly can and shoot for the sun, the moon, and the stars, because if you're not thinking big, no one else is going to do that part for you.
No, that's great. And that's exactly what we say at Endeavor. Think big. The biggest ideas, the more you really have this amazing vision and of creating this disruptive and innovative company, that's when, you just go for it. I know there's a lot of pressure with the amount of employees and you being a leader and making sure that, everything is running smoothly. So what advice would you give entrepreneurs that are just starting their own businesses? And also to those that, are seeing hyper growth in a short period of time, like you described, what advice would you give them? So both of things.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say, which entrepreneurs reach out to me all the time, and sometimes they say, I have an idea I'm working on part-time, and I understand the realities of why someone might have to do that. It's scary to start something. Maybe, there's financial pressure. It's hard to start something and not actually see any kind of income or revenue for a period of time. So I understand why a lot of people might do a startup as their side hustle, but honestly, a real startup, if you want it to be a success, it can't be anything less than 100% of your time. It actually needs to be kind of double or triple, because a startup is just all consuming. And if you want to win, you have to be all in. So I know that's not always what entrepreneurs want to hear from me. I think they want me to say, sure, just do it on the side, see how it goes. But I just think, maybe that works as a formula for a small business. But I think if you're trying to build something really big and transformative and disruptive and something that Endeavor would support, you really got to go for it. I'd say, whether it's entrepreneurs or people thinking about entrepreneurship or even in the corporate world, it's so important to figure out what you're good at. A lot of us, with time and perspective and experience, you realize you're not always good at all the things you're doing on a daily basis. And I think the sooner you recognize what are your superpowers better than anyone else on the team, that's where you should be focusing and prioritizing your time as much as possible. Now, sometimes that's not possible. In a startup, you might be doing your functional role, and you also might be taking out the garbage and, IT tech support when your computer crashes, and you play all these other roles too. I get it. But, I'm talking about the bulk of what you do. Figure out what you're good at and learn to delegate. When you're able to start bringing in people around you, it's really, I understand, because I remember living this at Gilt when we started growing and initially I was the chief merchandising officer, which meant I had to convince brands around the world to partner with us and sell to us. And we would go to trade shows, and I would come away from a trade show at 8:00 at night with a stack of hundreds of business cards. And in the early days, like my first trade show, I had never been to one before. I told the buyers that I was with, and meanwhile, they were very experienced at going to trade shows. That's what they had done for their full careers working at Saks Fifth Avenue. I had never even been to one. And I'm like, no, I'll do all the follow-up. And they're like, no, we'll split it up. Everybody, a third. We'll all do it. And I'm like, no. I need to do it, because part of me was like, well, what if they don't do it? What if they don't write a polite email? What if they get lazy and they don't follow through? And, they were like, look, you hired us because you trust us. We have to divvy it up. And so, it's a silly story, but it's just an example of when you're a founder, I think you worry maybe no one else will care as much as you do and will work as hard. And that's not true. I think if you foster a culture where everybody is part of the team, and in a tech company, I'm a big believer. I think everyone should have some equity in a business, some options, et cetera. then everyone really feels like an owner and has a vested interest. So delegating, I think, is really important. And the last thing I'll mention at this point is really think, hiring is so critical. Bring in the smartest people that you can around you. Bring in people smarter than you are. And if someone's not working out, I know we all try to make it work and maybe get coaching and talk through it, but rarely does it work out. So I think if someone's not working out in a startup where you're moving fast and you're lean and you don't have too many dollars to waste, if it's not working out, it's probably not going to work out. And the team will actually really thank you for maybe, exiting someone who's just not carrying their weight or potentially toxic.
Yeah, and it affects the culture, right? And we've heard so many times, hire slow and fire fast. And I think it's hard for a lot of founders to do that. But I think that's very critical advice that you've given us. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as a leader, I'm sure you appreciate the importance of leadership within a company. That being said, what do you look for when hiring or building a team that's not only capable and high performers, but necessary for a company to really scale?
So a lot of things. I love hiring. I've probably hired over 1,000 people in my career. So I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting people and trying to really connect with them and understand what makes them tick and what, you might have 5 people in a room who all are capable of doing the same job, but they're all motivated very differently. So I think if you can understand what is it that motivates them, what will their work ethic be like? What are they passionate about? Is this individual someone who can lead a team, be part of a team, or are they more of an individual contributor? And sometimes having individual contributors can be fantastic in certain roles where you don't necessarily need to have a lot of interdependencies with others, but you need to recognize that early on. Because if you have someone who's just not kind of team oriented, not interested in managing and mentoring others, and you put them in a leadership role, that might not work out so well. Whereas if they're just kind of doing their job and the objectives that are set out before them and not managing people, they can do incredibly well. Sometimes you'll see that maybe in a sales role of some sort, that, just wind the sales team up and let them go out there, and maybe they're not worried about all the really important things that go with managing a team and leading and incentivizing and motivating. So that's one suggestion I'd have. I think it's really important to try to set up your people, your teammates for success. And one thing I have found, because I've really been part of organizations from day one, we have an idea, let's go for it, to businesses scaling. And then most recently, before founding this fund, Clerisy, I actually worked at Allergan, which was a $15 billion revenue pharmaceutical company. So I've seen so many stages of companies. And what you find is sometimes as businesses evolve and grow, people's roles need to change and shift. And it doesn't mean you need to exit them from the organization. You just maybe need to make sure that they're in the right place. And one thing I've seen so many times in a startup, and the first time you go through it, it's emotional, and then you just get used to it, and it's just the way things often go. But often when you bring someone in, when you're a tiny team and you have very limited funding, the most senior person you find for marketing, let's say you're quote unquote head of marketing, who might in another organization be like a marketing manager, a marketing director, but in a 5-person startup, they're the head of marketing. There might come a point, if your business really grows and scales, that you're going to need to bring somebody above them who has much more experience. And that's not a sign of failure that initial hire didn't do a good job. In fact, that person probably did an awesome job. But you hit the moment where you need to bring in someone who has maybe decades of experience. And so that can, I think, sometimes be hard for people when they get sort of leveled, where they're not being told to exit, but someone comes in above them, and in some cases above them and above them and above them. And that can be hard. So I think just being very transparent with your team from day one of like, here's the team we have today. We're going to grow in all sorts of different directions. On the flip side, at Gilt, I have so many stories of bringing someone in to do a certain role. And then as we expanded into another category, someone on the team was like, I want to do it. Give me a chance. Let me try it. If it works out, great. If you need to change it up and bring someone else in, I understand. We did that all the time with people, and we took chances on people who might not have been hired for the role they were raising their hand for, but we gave them a chance, and a lot of times they did amazing.
Yeah. And that's part of the professional development that you want to create within the company's culture, right? So that people can grow within the team and different departments of the company, and also learning along the way. So I love your advice on that. And I think entrepreneurs, we see it all the time when they hire a certain talent and then the company grows and they need to hire someone, and that's fine too. So yeah, great insights. Wow, you had 2 exits, and that's very impressive. And Gilt was acquired by Hudson Bay back in 2016, and about 8 years after you founded it. And then Fitz was acquired by Clerisy in 2018. So what is your advice for entrepreneurs that hope to sell their companies in the future and, that aspire to have an exit? And could you please share any insights on how you handle the exiting process? Because sometimes it can be very tricky and complicated, and it's the advice that you can give entrepreneurs that are thinking of going on that process or that are actually doing it right now.
Yes. So I will say, first of all, that there are many ways to navigate this. I don't think there's one answer that was going to fit every situation, every type of business, in every country, every sector. It's going to depend on a lot of factors. So, one thing to think about when you're starting a company and you might have co-founders is to just make sure you're on the same page, because 2 founders could come together and one of them might be thinking, I'm going to build this business for the rest of my life and hand it on to the next generation, my children one day, and hopefully their grandchildren. Whereas the other founder might be like, I would love to build this and sell it within 5 years and make money and do my next thing. And so, those are 2 kind of radically different perspectives, but, the reality is probably it's never that extreme, but it's really important to kind of discuss with your founders and also with your investors, what does success look like? So you kind of realize you're on the same page. And when you're taking money, you need to recognize that investors, they're promising their investors something. And so if it's venture, it's maybe a different time frame from private equity, different from family offices. So timeline is really important. But I think at the end of the day, when you're starting out, especially if you're in your first inning, so to speak, of building the company, you got to build a great business. You've got to solve a problem for your customers,
Right.
Whether it's consumers, B2B, whatever it is. You need to think about, what is it that you're building? What's the secret sauce of your company that could be attractive to relevant acquirers? And different acquirers could be interested in different aspects of your business. One could be revenue, profitability, logistics, your community, if it's a product, what you're actually making. I mean, there's so many different things that could be attractive to different types of consumers. So really have an understanding of that. Your KPIs, I think, if you're building and you're more in a venture mindset, things like profitability and are different, perceived differently than if you're going more after a private equity investor who really will, be concerned about high burn and no clear path to profitability. So these are all factors. I think another question sometimes people have is, should I meet and start to build a relationship with potential acquirers early on? And again, no right answer, because it depends. And it depends, there's so many examples I can think of where the founders never met the company that acquired them and they used a banker and everything was fine and it worked out. And other cases where the founder was really building a relationship over years with who they were hoping could be some possible strategic acquirers. So that's all, it depends. I think it probably doesn't hurt to build your network and to globally as much as you can. So if you have opportunities to meet people that could acquire you, why not? Because, maybe there's scenarios where you can get to an exit faster. You can have some sort, there's also questions. Sometimes you have a strategic, make an investment in your company, and there are pros and cons to that. And that's a whole nother thing to debate about. But I think just being transparent with your current investors, your co-founders, if you have them, is really, really important.
Yeah, we have a company in my portfolio that had a strategic partner, and eventually they ended up acquiring their company, and it was a very smooth exit for them. So I guess building the relationships ahead of time also can pay off. But when did you realize that, or when do entrepreneurs realize that that's time to exit? Is it a gut feeling? Is it planned? Is it any specific conditions a company's living? What do you think is the right timing?
Again, I think it's very specific to a company and to how the investors view the timeline, and also what the market looks like. So there might be some companies that in a certain type of market could really make sense for an IPO, or more recently, maybe a kind of going through a SPAC. In other cases, it might really never seem like it's an IPO, IPO bound, and it would make sense to have more of a merger or an acquisition. So I think it really depends on the competitive landscape, on valuations also so important. So one thing that I kind of think about all the time, especially in the news these days, there's so many companies raising a lot of money for really high valuations, and that's great on paper, but at the end of the day, the common stock, the employees and the founders are really going to make money most likely on the final exit. And so it's not always about the valuations along the way, it's the exit. And sometimes when companies have such high valuations, it really limits who the potential acquirers are. And so that's something to really think about carefully when you're thinking about an exit. So again, no right answer, but just being very honest with yourself and the people that matter, the decision makers, on what the pros and cons are about any strategic decision.
Yeah, terrific advice. Thank you so much for sharing. And I completely agree with you. And right now we're seeing a hype in funding and valuation. So it can be tricky sometimes for founders to prepare for that future exit. So thank you for sharing your expertise and advice. So now, 2 years ago, you decided to unveil a Clerisy Growth Fund, a $100 million growth equity fund, focusing on supporting tech and consumer-focused companies. What drove you to go from founder and now investor, and what do you look for in founders when you invest in their companies?
So I'm loving this new chapter, Claudia, and I partnered, everything I've done has always been with partners, co-founders, whatever you want to call it. So my partner in Clerisy is a woman named Lisa Myers, and she was a partner at L. Catterton. I've known her for several years, and we are so well complemented to one another. Myself having been an operator for many years, and whereas Lisa has been an investor in public markets as well as private equity her entire career, and both of us always obsessed with the consumer and where the puck is going. Lisa as an investor, where's the puck going? Myself building businesses that in many cases were pretty ahead of the curve with respect to the consumer. And what we love doing is just meeting with founders and management teams every single day, learning. We've made 2 investments so far where we led the Series B in both cases. We get very hands-on, so for better or worse, we're the type of investors that are in it. I'm in the weeds. I can, if needed, jump into almost every role, not technical engineering roles, but can definitely work with engineers. And we're hands-on investors, which I think for some companies and some founders, they really love that and embrace that. And I'm sure there's some founders that are like, no, thank you. I don't really need investors to to get too involved. But we love supporting our portfolio companies and meeting great founders and really just sharing all the mistakes that we have learned in our decades of experience. And, I always say, as painful as it is to make mistakes, you learn in many cases more from the mistakes than from the successes. And so we're very honest and open, and we've seen a lot. I've done a lot of advising and angel investing over the years in over 60 companies, early stage. And our stage is growth equity. So for us, that means businesses over 10 million in revenue that are really scaling, hitting profitability, and needing not only capital to scale, but really needing partnership from their investors. So it's fun. I love it.
Oh, that's amazing. I think founders are super lucky to have you as an investor with all your experience. I think it would be great to have you as a mentor, along the way, and that you are also passionate about getting into the business and helping them succeed. I think that is the secret to success, right? Having the right investor as their partner. So congratulations, and I wish you all the best of luck with the fund, and hopefully you can start, doing great investments here in Miami. I don't know, are you focusing on the United States mostly, or you're looking for other markets?
We are open-minded, so our mandate isn't geography specific. The two investments we've made are based in the U.S. The first one's in New York, the second's in Austin, Texas, but very open to. I now live in Miami, so a Miami investment would be very convenient. But no, we're looking. We're open to global investments. So
perfect, and that's a great segue to my next question. That you've always been very close to Miami, and now you're living here. What made you and your family make Miami your new home? And how do you feel about the momentum that we're experiencing in Miami regarding our entrepreneurial ecosystem?
So my husband and I literally pinch ourselves every day, feeling so happy that we're living here. I think COVID really gave us a push that we always needed and hoped for to move here. We have come, I've come to Key Biscayne ever since I was a baby. My mother's Cuban, but it was always on vacation. And I always thought that my career had to be tied to New York, or lived and worked in London and other places, but I didn't know how I could kind of, in the fashion consumer tech world, work here. I just didn't envision it as a possibility. And I think COVID made us all realize you can get a lot done wherever you are, wherever that might be. And so we made the decision about a month into COVID to move here permanently with our family. So happy. And when we made the decision, we had no idea how much momentum and excitement in the kind of Miami tech space would be coming. And so that has just been an incredible added bonus and fun. And I remember when Endeavor started in Miami years ago, and was very close to that journey and that story. I went to business school with Peter Kellner, Adriana Cisneros is a good friend. And Laura Maidan and many of those that have made Endeavor Miami possible. And I think so much of what has happened in this city has been thanks to the great work that you guys do. But now it's amazing to see other organizations coming in, and momentum with investors and talent and engineering and crypto. And, I think it's pretty special. And I don't think that it only has to be companies that have a tie into Latin America now, which I always thought kind of had to be the case. I think you're seeing completely US focused funds and talent and companies coming from cities in California and New York, of course, and Chicago. And that's different. That's really fun. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really bullish on the city and everything that we're accomplishing here. So
yes, it's an exciting time for Miami. I mean, that's so many people supporting the development of the ecosystem. Endeavor was one of the first organizations here back 8 years ago when it started. And now we're seeing so many incredible entrepreneurs moving from different cities, Latin America and the United States, to Miami. And, even investors back in, I would say even 3 years ago, we had very few funds investing in companies here, and now it's like, okay, everybody discovered Miami, and are deploying a lot of capital to the entrepreneurs here in the city. So exciting times, and we're very happy to have you here in Miami now. So before we go, we have a couple of questions from the audience, and the first question comes from our Managing Director, Janem from Northwest Arkansas. Her question is, what were the major hiring staffing mistakes you made as your staff was doubling every year? And by the way, she's a huge fan of yours.
I mean, I think one mistake that I've made and I've seen other founders do is when you kind of get approval for headcount to fill a spot and a need, sometimes you fill it a little too quickly, and maybe that can be a mistake. So as tempting as it is when you're growing and scaling and you're kind of drowning in all the things that need to get done, it's okay maybe to slow down just a little bit, and make sure you're really bringing in the right person, because it's easy to hire people quickly. But if you make a mistake, and that certainly happened, fortunately not too many mistakes, but mistakes were made, then when you have to unwind that, it's not fun to exit someone. I think one thing I've always liked to do, which sometimes people find unconventional, when I was explaining that situation where you're bringing in someone above you or above someone else, let's say that first marketing person, and then you're bringing a chief marketing officer on top of them, involve that more junior person in the process. Involve them in the interviewing. I mean, maybe they're definitely not going to get the final say, but at least get that person excited of like, we're going to bring in someone amazing to help teach you all the things you don't know that I haven't been able to teach you because I don't know them either. And that can be, if positioned correctly, that can actually be really exciting for someone. I remember someone being like, wait, you want me to choose my boss? I'm like, well, not exactly, sort of, like pick the most awesome boss ever. Who would you dream to learn from and work with? And that's the kind of, motivating approach, I think, sometimes for when you bring in people above.
I completely agree. That's great advice. And it also helps the team, have all working in the same direction towards one common goal, and getting people with the right experience into the company just turbocharges that process to get to the goals that you have set for the business. So I think that's terrific. One other question: what issues do you think entrepreneurs are prone to overlook when they expand rapidly, when they start just growing?
Well, there's so many, there's a lot. I would say that one thing that's just so important, and one of the companies I'm in, early stage companies I'm in touch with since I lived in New York, they reached out to me this week and they said, we faced a cash crunch. We're doing great. We actually have tremendous revenue. We're profitable. And for one reason or another, we took our eye off the cash, and they faced a real, they're going to be fine, but it was kind of a momentary panic for the company, even though it's been around for a while. And I think that's, just always make sure you're keeping your eye on the cash and, inflows and outflows. I think that's really important. And I'd say another thing I have seen so many times, thank goodness it hasn't happened really to me, is I've seen a lot of challenges sometimes between co-founders, just kind of parting ways. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that, but my advice is to be as open and transparent as possible with your co-founders. If you have them, don't avoid the tough conversations, have them take the time to say, we got to talk about something, whatever it is. It could be something very minor, like it annoys me when you do XYZ, to something very significant of like, I think you're making a huge mistake in how you're running the business or managing your team or whatever it is. But I think it's important to be very open and transparent with your co-founders and your team. And I would say that time and age and experience has made transparency much easier for me. I'd say early in my career, it was very hard. I hated delivering tough messages. I thought delivering tough messages, be positive, and that's going to motivate people more. And if you want people to be working 24/7, how can you be negative also. And what I learned over time is people actually appreciate the tough messages. I mean, a lot of it is how you deliver them, but they listen, they appreciate it. And in the end, it can help make your company that much better.
Yeah, and it's the process of being a good leader, right? Coaching your team, making sure that they understand. I mean, nobody is perfect. No one, has everything under the belt and knows how to be sometimes a good team player or a manager. And so if you're senior, then you have that responsibility to make sure your team is learning from you and growing, right? And eventually they can take over your job, and that's perfectly fine. That's what you want, high performers, great people in your company. And again, what you mentioned about co-founders, it's like a marriage, right? You have to have a great communication in order to have a successful relationship and alignment to take the company to the next level. So I completely agree with you, and very terrific advice that we've had from you. Any last comment or insights, advice you want to give our audience of entrepreneurs or possible entrepreneurs, people that are thinking of becoming entrepreneurs? Any last comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just thank you for having me today. And, entrepreneurship is amazing and it's exciting and there's nothing like it in the world. And there's many ways to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to necessarily have the idea to be an entrepreneur, to be entrepreneurial, to be part of an entrepreneurial team, in my opinion. So you can be a team member of a startup, and I would call you an entrepreneur as well. And, follow your dreams. You only get to live once. So if you're really kind of like debating, should I go for it or not? My advice is, take those calculated risks, and go for it.
Alexandra, you're a rock star. I admire your experience and everything that you've been able to accomplish. We're very fortunate having you in our network. And thank you so much for joining us today at the Summit powered by Endeavor. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
And to all of our audience, I hope you enjoyed this incredible conversation with Alexandra. If you want to connect with her, she's available on LinkedIn or through Endeavor, you can contact her.